This is Brian Perry with Perry Home Solutions of Keller Williams Realty. I'm here with Jerry Chu of Lofty.ai. Hey, Jerry, how are you?
I'm doing well, Brian. Thanks for having me here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for joining me. Really looking forward to this. So I wanted to take a couple of minutes right off the cuff, Jerry, and just kind of dive into a little bit about what exactly is Lofty AI. Just a brief overview, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, definitely. Great question. So Lofty AI is basically an online marketplace where you can buy and sell real estate properties. It's just that unlike the traditional way where one seller can only sell to one buyer, we allow one seller to sell to multiple buyers at the same time using our platform. And the way we do that is essentially we help these buyers pool funds together in an LLC created here in Wyoming in the US. They'll pool funds together, and if there's enough interest and the property reaches sufficient funding in the LLC, then they will actually go and collectively purchase the underlying property together, at which point the deed will transfer from the seller to the buyer. And instead of having one owner, as is a traditional case, you can sometimes have dozens, if not hundreds of owners in these properties. But what's even more unique is even after the closing, we're just a platform. So we build a technology that lets people easily communicate with other members and get updated on their properties and how to manage it and so forth. But we ourselves, we're not a fund. We don't help our users manage their properties. We don't act as a manager in any regards. And so after the property closes, every owner in that LLC will actually collectively vote to manage through a really democratic process on how they want to manage that property. Over time, do they want to sell it? Which property management company they want to hire? How to deal with rent increases, how to deal with tenant delinquencies if things like that come up, repairs, and anything you would imagine being a rental property owner. You would basically decide yourself amongst your co-owners in that property. And so we started doing this in May of 2021, and today we've essentially have over 140 properties on our marketplace that have been sold this way. Essentially, we call them tokenization. So we've tokenized 140 properties to date.
And you said 140 properties you've done.
Right.
Oh, that's amazing. And real briefly, and this might be a little too deep in the weeds, can you explain a little bit more about the tokenization and fractionalization of it? Like for people that have never heard that before, what does that really mean?
Yeah, I mean, traditionally real estate is always one of those asset classes that's rather expensive. And so it's actually not a strange phenomenon if you think about it. And I'm sure people have experienced this themselves or have family members or friends that have experienced this. Typically, when people invest or purchase real estate, they often go out to raise funding from other people, or they'll do it with partners, right? So you see this a lot, like a group of family, like a couple brothers and sisters, they'll pool money together to acquire a property together. A group of colleagues or something like that will pool funds to acquire a property together. So it's not actually a strange phenomenon in the investment rental space. It's just that traditionally that's always been relegated to you have to have the right connections, you have to know the right people, right? What if you're just in a family that doesn't really like real estate that much? What if your colleagues have no interest in owning a rental property? Then you're kind of stuck, right? But with technology these days, it allows you to connect with people who have like-minded and similar interests and the same sort of want as you from all around the world. And so you no longer need to be specifically in that group where I have to know these people in person. We essentially allow you to connect with people from anywhere in the world and decide to do the exact same thing. And that makes it a lot easier for people.
That's amazing. Yeah. Well, I'm glad to be able to talk to you because I really think that, this is the future of real estate, or at least it should be. And I've been working with people investing in real estate for 15 years. And I just think that this would just bring opportunities to people that really should have them that don't. So I think it's great.
Yeah, that's a big belief we have as well. Real estate is a very expensive asset class to own, but at least here in the United States, it's a really important asset class for the maintenance and creation of wealth, and has a lot of tax benefits that other asset classes don't have. And unfortunately, it's just really expensive. And so a lot of people are kind of locked out of this asset class. And so that's quite a shame. And we think more people should have access to it. On top of that, having, such expensive assets means a lot of times people lack diversification. They end up concentrating too much of their wealth in a single property or in a couple properties located in the same neighborhood or the same city, which often then, you run into these macro events where maybe everywhere else is fine, right, in the country, real estate wise, but maybe in your city, in your neighborhood, things aren't doing so well. And you end up taking the entire brunt of that negative consequence onto your portfolio, whereas doing it this way allows you to deploy the same amount of capital, but you can essentially diversify in a much more meaningful way.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate sharing that. Yeah. And I want to dive a little bit deeper. And I had a couple other questions, but that last statement you made kind of raised something in me that I was thinking about, because one of the interesting, something I'd love to do with Lofty is, I know people and I know investment opportunities in my local area here in Palm Beach County, Florida. And I just think it also, in addition to everything you just said, which I'm not devaluing at all, I think that's fantastic. But in addition to that, if we find, if I have a client or somebody I know, a friend that sees a property that would be a great investment opportunity, but they don't have the capital to purchase it themselves, or maybe they don't want to take on the responsibility all by themselves, I just think that utilizing this type of a system would just be such a fantastic way of engaging with the real estate market. From that
definitely.
perspective.
I mean, we are a technology platform, so we basically enable real estate transactions this way. We allow people to buy fractional interests in real estate in a very easy way, and also to manage it themselves. Allow them to do diligence. We've eroded away information asymmetry, right? So traditionally in real estate, typically the sellers know more about a property than a buyer, but on our platform, you can actually trade peer to peer. So some of these property owners, they're selling out their ownership in a specific property. Maybe they own 2%, 3% of it. And when they're selling, all of the information about the properties, all of its historical voting decisions, all like any maintenance issues it may have, any maintenance it's done in the past, if the tenant is paying rent or currently delinquent, all that information is publicly available. So before you go buy this person's interest, you actually already know ahead of time, and you have the same exact set of information that they have. So it's impossible for someone to say, I'm going to sell my ownership because something's going wrong, and then hopefully the buyer's a sucker and they don't know about it, right? And so on our platform, we maintain that information flow so that everyone has the same information flow. And by doing it that way, it becomes a really great way where, people can, it's extremely flexible. People can kind of do all sorts of things on it, right? We have, for example, renters that find out about our platform and then they start buying ownership in the house that they're renting. So essentially what they've done is they've created a rent to own solution that's customized for themselves, where if they have extra income, they can put more into buying ownership. If they don't, then all they have to do is pay rent, which is infinitely more flexible than a lot of very specific rent to own solutions that exist on the market right now, right? And so the way I always say is, look, we're just a platform. Real estate can be transacted and owned this way, online, managed online, and traded online, essentially, right, without ever meeting other people face to face. And what you want to do with it, well, that's ultimately up to you.
Yeah. The renters owning the home that they're renting really blows my mind. That is a very fascinating perspective, and something that I don't think has ever existed prior in any real form. And the other thing that I really appreciate about the tokenized ownership concept is how you can actually trade the actual tokens via, I believe it's an order book style.
Mm-hmm.
And so, with real estate, you have to hire an appraiser or rely on somebody like me, to tell you what the value is,
Yep.
or God forbid, a place like Zillow, right? And then, make judgments on that. And like you said, you don't have all the insight that the seller does to the condition of the property and the history of it, and so on and so forth. Then it takes you 30 or 45 or 60 days to close it.
Yep.
And here you can just purchase a token in 5 minutes on the site. I just think that's also a very unique aspect of this.
And as crazy as it sounds, if you change your mind 5 minutes later, you can sell that token in 5 minutes as well.
And it's valued in real time amongst
Correct.
buyers and sellers.
Yeah.
that are actively exchanging these tokens on the site.
Correct. Yeah, and they're actively, trading these tokens with relevant real world information. So the property is actually appraised essentially on a monthly basis, right? So that's what's giving it the fair market value, if you will. And then that value is displayed to all the owners, the sellers and the buyers. And then ultimately, in the real world, something is worth what someone's willing to pay for, right? Ultimately. Mm-hmm. And so the tokens may not trade at the exact price. It could be above or below the estimated value of the home. But at least it's there just to give people peace of mind. Like, hey, if you want to overpay for whatever reason, you have some conviction, maybe you research about that neighborhood and you think it's really going to take off in the next 2 years, so you're willing to overpay a bit now, or you're looking for a deal, so you're buying it below what the property is potentially worth. But that information is there, so you're making your decision with the relevant information.
And when you say appraised on a monthly basis, I actually own some of the real estate through Lofty. And I do notice that there is a service that you use in order to value. Is that what you're referring to with the appraisal?
Yeah, it's a company called House Canary. So they'll come in, they'll basically appraise all the properties on the marketplace on a monthly basis.
On a monthly basis, got it. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm just going to dive in a couple of general questions that I thought would be valuable to people listening. So we're talking about investment real estate, essentially. What different types of opportunities are available on the platform right now?
Yeah, it's mostly single family rental properties, although we do have a commercial strip mall actually as well that has a McDonald's and a Domino's as the anchor tenant. But it's mostly single family rental properties along with a couple of multifamily units that's anywhere from 4 to 5 units. And in terms of geography, it's mostly Midwest based. So you have a lot in Ohio, but we also have properties in Alabama. We actually have 2 in Miami, Florida as well. So kind of all around the place. And ultimately the goal is to, one day you'll come to the platform and you'll be able to browse properties and, potential deals and interesting investment opportunities all around the country.
Where do you want to take it? Like what's the next step? Would you like to expand geographically where you are, the types of homes or properties or?
Yeah. So obviously we like to cover a larger geography, but that's not really based on us. Again, we're not going out to acquire these properties ourselves and then, flipping them onto our users or anything like that. So we just maintain the marketplace where anyone can come and list a property for sale. But we actually have a pretty stringent check and a criteria. So not everyone can realistically list properties. We actually do a background check on the seller. We've filtered out people with like prior convictions for mortgage fraud and things like that. So they're just not allowed to interact with our market. And then we make sure that, if you have a tenant, you have to provide very clear rent rolls that can be verified. If you're selling the property, you have to get inspection reports, appraisal reports. So all the disclosure and sort of due diligence documents are standardized on our platform. If you can't provide those, you can't, you don't want to pay for those, you can't list either, right? So then given that, because we don't actually ever own any of the properties, we never own interest in any of the properties. Ultimately, it's just, where do people have an interest in listing and selling their properties, right? And so when we expand into a market, it's not like a lot of other real estate companies where they have to physically have a presence. Like we have to send our team there to find deals and acquire properties and then, rehab them and then sell them to our users. For us, it's just, someone in Hawaii wants to sell their vacation property, right? A vacation rental. They met all the criteria. There was interest and people on our platform decided to buy it. Boom, we just expanded into Hawaii, right? It's as simple as that.
And I presume that as long as a property and the situation meets your general criteria, that anybody from any state could bring you an opportunity.
That's
you
correct.
Don't have any kind of limitations as far as where you would be open to work providing that.
So it's very important. We don't choose what is considered a good investment for you, right? We just make sure that the information you would need to make an informed decision is present for you. So you actually can make a decision on what's good for you. And then we make sure that, the person actually bringing the deal has the right to sell the property, right? They actually, own the title clear and things like that. So those are the only checks we provide, but ultimately it's up to you. There are some deals that are brought to the platform where, users haven't liked it, and so they don't close, right? And then there are deals that have been brought to the platform in the past that have been so, I guess, appealing. This is an extreme situation, but we've had a property sell out after it was being listed on our platform in 8 seconds, all cash.
Wow.
Yeah. So the moment, and so we actually want to prevent where people just kind of, FOMO and just don't read any documents and just invest in things. So a property is actually listed prior to people being able to purchase it for 24 hours, where there's like a countdown timer. So you can research about the property. The address is provided for you. You can look it up on a map. You can show up in person if you really want to, or if you live close by. And all the diligence documents are there for you. And then you have 24 hours to really kind of dig into this and decide, is this for me? Do I think this is a good investment? Does it make sense for my portfolio? And then after the timer expires, you then actually have the ability to purchase the tokens. And so in that property specific case, after the timer expired, in 8 seconds, it was completely sold out.
That's amazing. How about, are there any legal or tax ramifications that our listeners might want to be aware of?
Yeah, legally speaking, the way the structure works is, again, not that uncommon. To be honest, we haven't really invented too many new things. It's a structure that most people are used to and are familiar with. So many investors will own their properties through an LLC, right? So in this case, it's basically a member managed LLC. And what ends up happening is the LLC owns the deed to the property, and you become an owner in the LLC, right? Whatever percent, 10%, 5%, whatever you're comfortable putting in. And then by proxy, that LLC owns nothing except for that one property. And so, by proxy, you basically own 5% of the future cash flows and all profits and earnings and sale proceeds from that property, right? So that's kind of how the legal structure works. And again, it's a pretty common thing that people do. Provides liability protection for the token owners as well. And then in terms of taxes, again, multi-member LLCs are essentially taxes partnerships. So again, for people that have done real estate deals in the past, this is not going to be unfamiliar either. You just receive K1s on your properties. Every property has its own independent LLC, so everything is separate, right? There's no fund or one master LLC you can invest into that owns a bunch of different properties. We don't do that. You basically build your own portfolio, right? Given like, hey, I like these 5 properties, but none of the others. So you can just build a portfolio around those 5 properties. And so if you own 5 properties, you would just receive 5 K1s each year. So that's how taxes would work.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. That makes perfect sense. How does the one quick question I had. The maximum ownership of an individual property, I had a note, was 10%. Is that right?
Yeah. It's 10% by default. And then if the property isn't selling so hot, for example, that can be relaxed up to 15%.
Oh, I see. Got it.
But the idea is, look, you're managing the property collectively with other people. It's meant to be a sort of a democratic process. So you want everyone to feel like their vote matters, right? Even if they own a smaller percentage relative to someone. And so this is a good way where, one person can't really realistically just kind of string the rest of the partnership along and do whatever that person wants to do. The max you can get is 15%. And so, other people can very easily vote you down if you start doing sort of, I guess, bad proposals or things that aren't friendly or good for your fellow co-owners.
Yeah, that makes sense. I also saw a note that I think that you guys were rolling out an opportunity to create your own private ownership structure within Lofty. Yep. I don't know anything about that, so I'd love to hear kind of what that's all about.
Yeah, it's just an extension of the marketplace, right? So there's deals that come into the platform where it's just a seller interested in selling their property this way. And then if there's enough buyers interested, then the deal will get funded, it will get closed. And that group of strangers on the internet are now sort of business partners owning this rental property together. But sometimes, like I said in the past, it's pretty common for people who have family members or colleagues or just groups of close friends that they've already invest frequently with, right? And so for a group like that, they can just bypass that whole situation and say, look, we have a deal that, in our local town, city, whatever is the case, and we're really interested, just a group of 5 people, we want to acquire that deal. And then we want to just do it through Lofty, because part of what we've done is we made the management, sort of decentralized management between multiple parties, really easy, right? So you don't have to worry, like, one person doesn't have to phone and chase down all the other votes and to make sure, like, hey, we want to do this. Are you in or are you out? Such a manual, high friction process, right? With Lofty, everything is just done conveniently through the platform. And so people want to do that. And we have a private program where you can essentially come to us and say, look, we have a deal we want to do. We are going to bring it onto your platform, but it's only going to be open for us 5 people that want to be in this deal initially. And then after it's closed and you guys own it through the platform, in the future, you can still take advantage of the secondary market. If one of the owners wants to liquidate their position, you're still able to do that. We also have actually users who already own their own rental portfolio. And they just, again, realize that managing it through Lofty is substantially easier than doing it themselves outside of Lofty. And so they're now asking us, hey, I have 5 properties. Can I just like onboard them over onto Lofty? And I just own 100% of all 5 properties, but it's still tokenized. I still get to use your platform. I still get to manage it virtually this way. They also benefit from a lot of things that have economies of scale, for example, insurance policies and property management fees, right? So our users vote on which property managers they want to use for the properties in a given area. And a lot of times there's quite a lot of properties in that area. So instead of one property being onboarded, you onboard a whole sort of large portfolio to the point where the property manager is willing to come and say, look, if your users are willing to switch over to us, instead of charging you 10% of the gross rents per month, we'll do 5% of the gross rents, right? Mm-hmm. So you're literally benefiting from that discount. And a lot of our users realize, wow, if I go to the same city, buy my own property, and even use the exact same insurance company with the exact same policy and get the exact same property manager, I will end up paying more fees. So I might as well just do it through Lofty, even if I want to be the only owner, right? So a lot of them have started realizing that. So they're taking advantage of that private program as well.
Economies of scale, right? Yep. And another interesting feature on Lofty is that I'm aware of, none of the properties carry any debt, right?
Correct. So currently they are all cash deals.
And will that change in the future?
Yes. In the future, we will open it up so that people can optionally choose to take on leverage, essentially kind of create a mortgage structure around their ownership. But what we can uniquely allow people to do is that traditionally people kind of have it to be in agreement and say, look, we're going to take on debt and the underlying property is leveraged up, right? In that scenario, it works fine if you're the only owner, or maybe there's 4 or 5 owners in there. It's easy to get consensus. But when you start having maybe 90 owners or 100 owners or something like that, it becomes tougher when you could have one owner in that property say, I'm just conservative. I only want to put in cash in this deal. I don't want to lever up the property because, in case of delinquencies from the tenant, things like that, I don't want to be on the hook paying out cash on the mortgage and things like that. And then you have another same person in the same partnership, and they could be the complete opposite and say, what is the maximum leverage you'll allow me to take? I want to do that, right? And so we realized there's a unique way where through our technology platform, we can create it so that leverage can be provided on the token purchases, not the underlying property. So the property itself will always be all cash. But one person could, decide, hey, I want to buy $500 worth of ownership and pay all cash for it. But someone else could come into the same deal, same property and same LLC and say, I also want $500 worth of ownership, but I'm only going to pay $100 and I'm going to borrow the remaining 400, right? And then this way, if a person isn't responsible or something were to happen, the risks is siloed with that individual borrower. It doesn't affect the rest of the partnership. It doesn't affect the property. It doesn't affect someone else who put in all cash. And so we think that is a more flexible structure, and it's a better sort of structure for users in terms of risk and how that's structured. And so because we have to do it that way, it takes a little bit longer. But otherwise, we would already allow leverage where you can just lever up the entire property. But we're pursuing something we think will be more beneficial and previously didn't really exists in the real estate industry. And so we're really excited about eventually when we roll that out.
That's fascinating. Well, you've already sort of delved in to my last question for you, which was I was hoping to get, what they call maybe a little bit of alpha from you and find out kind of what you guys are working on in the future.
Yeah.
And the debt portion of that or the leverage portion seems to be an element of that. Is there anything else you can share?
Yeah, one of the important things we're focused on is the peer-to-peer transactions on the secondary market, right? So right now it's an order book-based system where everyone enters a limit order. I'm willing to sell my tokens at this price. Someone else comes and says, I'm putting an order. I'm willing to buy at this price. And if there happens to be, matching, right, the same price, our technology will basically match the orders and the deal will go through. There's no intermediaries. We're not taking custody of your tokens or your funds at any point in time. It's a direct peer-to-peer swap and transaction between you and whoever the counterparty is, right? The downside to that, though, is sometimes there isn't price consensus, right? Someone wants to buy, someone wants to sell, but at different prices. And so we want to help the market achieve more liquidity. So one of the features we're building, without being too technical, will essentially allow there to be a consistent market price, right? So, it might not be the best price you think, it might not be your preferred price, but you'll know that as long as you're willing to buy or sell at that price, the transaction will go through pretty much instantaneously, right? So you'll get that liquidity. And so most people in the real world just prefer to be a price taker, knowing as long as there is pretty much instant liquidity behind it. And so that's a feature we're rolling out where, if we're successful, the outcome is pretty groundbreaking. You'll essentially be able to buy and sell real estate, right? These are real ownership, like you actually do legally own the underlying property. So actual real estate, you'll be able to buy and sell them as if you're buying and selling stocks. It'll be the same experience, right? Like if you were to go out and buy Tesla shares and you're like, hey, well, this is the market price quoted to me by my brokerage, and you just click a button and like, boom, instantly you're now an owner in Tesla. And if you want to sell 10 minutes later, you push another button and boom, it just goes through. So right now we hope to be able to achieve that for real estate as well soon.
That's amazing. Yeah. I guess that would go hand in hand with the leverage piece too, right?
Exactly. And that's a reason why this piece actually needs to be built out before the leverage piece, because you can think about it from a lender's perspective. They need to have comfort around what they're lending against, right? Like if you pledge, you can go to a lender and pledge shares in your own business for some, real world asset you own. But if there's not a lot of liquidity there, most of the time the lender isn't that willing to accept that as collateral, right? It's harder for them to price it. But again, using the analogy, if you go to a lender and say, I have, $10 million worth of Tesla shares, I want to pledge that as collateral, can you give me a loan? Pretty much every single lender out there will accept that because it's so transparently easy for them to calculate and underwrite and price exactly what that's worth on a daily basis. And so once we actually create that for real estate, then you can realistically go out and say, look, I have 1/10 of the ownership in this house. I like to use that as collateral for something else, right? Another loan that I go to do something else with, or I want to leverage up and I'm using my equity in, these 5 tokens to borrow enough funds to buy the remaining 20 tokens. And the lender will be happy to do that because they now know what those 5 tokens would be worth if you can't pay and they liquidate you, because they can just now go back to the marketplace and sell it and get their principal back, right? So that's kind of the whole structure and how we're planning out the features.
Well, that's really great. I appreciate you sharing all that. Well, this has been quite mind-blowing, Jerry. I really appreciate all of the details that you've shared. I actually learned quite a few things, and I've done a lot of homework on your project there. So again, thank you very much. I won't take up any more of your time. And if anybody wants to learn more about your system, they can go to lofty.ai, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me here. And, for folks on the brokerage or agent side, you're welcome to participate. We've had agents bring their, clients' deals over to Lofty and sell it that way. And it's, been a nice, easy process for them to gain more business for themselves as well, right? So happy, again, we're just a platform. Anyone who's interested in buying, managing, selling real estate can essentially interact with our ecosystem.
Well, I'm planning on bringing that as an option. So that's awesome. Yeah.
Definitely glad to hear that. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Jerry.